我怎么不替他呀？
让一下好吧。
For 10 years, the disappearance of Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 has haunted the world. 239 people vanished without a trace, and every search, every sonar scan ended in silence. But now, artificial intelligence has changed everything. By re-listening to archived satellite pings, crunching billions of data points, and modeling ocean currents with uncanny precision, AI has converged upon a region in the southern Indian Ocean. But its revelation goes beyond narrowing down crash zones. Instead, it hints at something far more sinister than any theory before, a possibility that this was no random tragedy. When a supercomputer flags inconsistencies in historic Inmarsat logs, isolates unlikely drift trajectories, and cross-verifies underwater acoustic signals, the result does more than rewrite search maps. It suggests that we may have misread the story all along. The implications are chilling. What if the plane was guided into the abyss on purpose? So the question remains, what really happened out there in the endless dark of the Indian Ocean? It began as a routine red-eye flight. At 12:41 a.m. on March 8, 2014, Malaysia Airlines Flight 370 lifted off from Kuala Lumpur International Airport, bound for Beijing. On board were 239 souls, 227 passengers and 12 crew, families, business travelers, students, people expecting an uneventful 6-hour trip. For the first 40 minutes, everything looked normal. The Boeing 777 climbed steadily to 35,000 feet, crossed the Malaysian coastline, and prepared to enter Vietnamese airspace. Then, without warning, the radar feed began to flicker. At 1:21 a.m., the transponder, the device that identifies a plane to civilian controllers, went completely dark. MH370 vanished from commercial radar. Only military scopes still showed a faint trace, a ghost moving in the wrong direction. Controllers in Kuala Lumpur tried to call the cockpit. So did Ho Chi Minh Center. There was no reply. The radio line stayed open, filled only with static. When another Malaysia Airlines jet nearby tried to reach them, they too heard nothing. In those few minutes, a modern jetliner, equipped with multiple redundancies and global tracking, seemed to have slipped off the map. Hours passed before Malaysia officially declared the plane missing. Relatives gathered at airports in Kuala Lumpur and Beijing, staring at flight information boards that still listed MH370 as delayed. Behind the scenes, however, military radar told a different story. The plane had turned sharply west, crossed back over the Malay Peninsula, and continued flying for hours. That data was not released to the public for nearly a week, a silence that would fuel suspicion and anger across the world. Satellite tracking later confirmed that MH370 continued transmitting brief handshakes to Inmarsat satellites for another 7 hours. Those pings placed it somewhere over the vast southern Indian Ocean, one of the most remote places on Earth. But in the first days, none of that was known. All anyone understood was that a Boeing 777 had turned around, flown off course, and disappeared into the night. News networks looped the same animation, a glowing flight path that suddenly bent and stopped mid-screen. Families pleaded for answers while officials issued carefully worded statements. Theories flooded in: a fire, a decompression, a hijacking. Yet none could explain why the plane reversed direction without distress calls, or why no debris was ever found near its original route. In the control centers, investigators asked the same question the world was asking: Who turned that plane around, and why? In the first days after Flight MH370 vanished, chaos replaced clarity. The world was desperate for an explanation, and fear filled the silence left by the missing plane. When Malaysian officials confirmed that 2 passengers had boarded using stolen passports, one Italian, one Austrian, the story instantly shifted. Headlines across CNN, The Guardian, and Reuters screamed one word: terrorism. Investigators released grainy CCTV stills showing the men walking through Kuala Lumpur International Airport. Within hours, speculation erupted online. A hijacking, a bomb, an act of revenge. Governments tightened airport security worldwide, and families of passengers clung to any theory that could explain how a modern Boeing 777 could simply disappear. But the truth, when it came, was far more ordinary and far more frustrating. Interpol quickly confirmed the men were not terrorists at all. They were Iranian asylum seekers, Puria Noor Mohammad Mehrdad, age 19, and Delavar Sayed Mohammad Reza, age 29, young men fleeing hardship, hoping to reach Europe through Beijing. Neither had any link to extremist groups. The supposed terror plot had wasted critical days of the investigation. While the world chased shadows, the real mystery deepened. No hijacker's message was ever received. No demands, no manifesto, nothing. Search teams scoured the Gulf of Thailand, the South China Sea, and the Andaman Sea. Each new location brought nothing but ocean. Satellite images misread clouds as wreckage, leading to false alarms that only heightened the public's sense of dread. Inside Malaysia's control rooms, confusion grew. Radar data, initially withheld, suggested the plane had turned west, crossing the country's own airspace before vanishing over the Andaman Sea. But the information was released too late for rescue missions to act. Families watching television saw officials contradict each other almost daily, each update eroding what little trust remained. International anger mounted. The United States sent a Navy destroyer. Australia deployed surveillance aircraft. China, which had more than 150 of its citizens on board, demanded transparency. But the search grid was already expanding beyond comprehension, covering millions of square miles. For investigators, the nightmare had only begun. In Beijing, relatives slept for weeks in the airport waiting area, clutching photos and pleading for truth. Malaysia Airlines distributed small slips of paper asking them to remain patient, but patience was running out. The missing Boeing had become more than a tragedy. It was now a geopolitical storm. By late March, the terrorism theory had collapsed, leaving only uncertainty behind. There were no traces of hijackers, no signals from distress frequencies, and no floating debris. The radar trace ending over the Andaman Sea was the last confirmed sign of life. If it wasn't a hijacking and it wasn't a terror attack, then what was it? Who, if anyone, had taken control of the plane? And why did it turn around that night, flying silently toward the dark? As days turned into weeks, Flight MH370's disappearance became the largest and most complex search operation the aviation world had ever seen. 26 countries joined forces, deploying satellites, submarines, and long-range reconnaissance planes in an effort to find even a single trace of the missing Boeing 777. Australia, China, the United States, and the United Kingdom took the lead. Advanced radar arrays scanned vast portions of the Indian Ocean. Ships dragged sonar systems capable of mapping the seabed at depths of nearly 3 miles. Drones and underwater vehicles dove into pitch-black trenches where pressure could crush steel. Every movement, every sound, every shimmer of debris was investigated. The numbers were staggering. The search covered more than 120,000 square kilometers of ocean floor, an area nearly the size of Pennsylvania, and cost over $150 million. Crews endured months of isolation at sea, battling rough weather and mechanical failures, all to chase a ghost. But there was one fatal problem no one had realized soon enough. The underwater locator beacon attached to MH370's black box had expired in 2012. That tiny battery, worth less than $30, had died 2 years before the crash. When the plane hit the water, the beacon stayed silent. The automatic distress signal that should have guided rescuers never came. Without it, search teams were navigating blind. Instead of chasing pings, they chased theories. Analysts calculated drift models, oceanographers mapped currents, and satellites looked for faint oil slicks that might indicate wreckage. Yet every lead collapsed into nothing. In April 2014, a Chinese vessel detected acoustic signals that briefly reignited hope. For a moment, the world believed the black box had finally been found. But later tests showed the pings came from the ship's own equipment. Hope turned into exhaustion, then despair. Months passed. Families waited for answers that never arrived. Governments traded accusations over who should continue funding the mission. The world had poured money, manpower, and technology into the deepest search ever attempted, only to come back empty-handed. Then, 17 months after MH370 vanished, the first real breakthrough finally appeared. On July 29, 2015, a beachcomber on the French island of Réunion stumbled upon a torn piece of metal washed ashore. It was a flaperon, the hinged part of a Boeing 777's wing, and forensic analysis confirmed it belonged to MH370. For the first time, there was proof. The plane had ended its flight somewhere in the Indian Ocean, but a single piece of wreckage could not explain where or why it fell. After more than a year and hundreds of millions spent, the world had only one small fragment of truth and an ocean full of questions. When the flaperon from flight MH370 washed ashore on Réunion Island in July 2015, the world finally had proof that the plane had gone down somewhere in the Indian Ocean. After 17 months of silence, this single wing fragment confirmed what many had feared: no one had survived. Investigators studied the debris in detail. Barnacle growth showed it had floated for over a year, drifting thousands of miles from the crash site. But that discovery raised a new question. If the ocean could carry this one piece so far, where had it come from, and how many more were still adrift? Over the next 2 years, more fragments surfaced across Africa's eastern coast and nearby islands. Parts of the engine cowling, interior panels, and landing gear covers. Each was identified as Boeing 777 material, matching MH370's design and paint, yet none could pinpoint the exact crash site. Every piece had been shaped by months of violent seas, turning vital evidence into a puzzle with missing parts. To narrow the search, scientists used computer models to simulate how debris might drift across the ocean. But they overlooked one subtle force: Stokes drift, a surface wave motion that can push floating objects hundreds of miles off course. Without it, ships and sonar teams spent years scanning the wrong waters. By 2019, it became clear that traditional oceanography alone could never solve the mystery. Human error, limited data, and outdated models had turned the search into an endless maze. What was needed was a system that could see what humans could not: patterns buried in chaos. That's when artificial intelligence entered the story. Unlike earlier models, AI could process every ocean current, temperature shift, and wind pattern across an entire decade, recalculating millions of trajectories in seconds. For the first time, the algorithm didn't just follow the ocean, it understood it. and what it found would change everything. By 2020, the mystery of Flight MH370 had reached a standstill. Years of human investigation had led nowhere, and the wreckage still lay hidden somewhere beneath one of the deepest, most unforgiving oceans on Earth. So scientists decided to turn the search over to something that never slept, never got tired, and could see patterns no human eye could. They turned it over to artificial intelligence. A team of data scientists from Australia, the United Kingdom, and the United States began feeding massive amounts of information into a machine learning system. Every radar trace, every sonar sweep, every satellite handshake ever recorded during the final hours of MH370's flight. The dataset contained billions of individual readings, from weather data to ocean currents to acoustic patterns detected by military hydrophones. The AI was told to find what humans had missed. At first, it seemed like just another data project, but then something strange began to emerge. The system detected subtle time delays in the Inmarsat satellite data, microsecond differences that had been dismissed as noise in earlier reports. Yet those delays were not random. When mapped in sequence, they revealed a consistent drift in signal alignment, suggesting that the plane's true flight path might have been hundreds of miles away from where investigators had been searching. According to the new analysis, MH370 had likely continued flying west-southwest for several hours after disappearing from civilian radar. It didn't simply vanish into the ocean. It traveled deep into the southern Indian Ocean, far beyond the boundaries of previous search grids. The AI's calculations pointed toward a remote sector west of Perth, Australia, an area never thoroughly examined because early models had ruled it out. When researchers overlaid the AI's coordinates with oceanographic drift models, the result was shocking. The predicted crash site aligned perfectly with the regions where real debris had been found between 2015 and 2017. For the first time, the evidence, satellite, ocean, and physical fragments finally lined up. The findings were published in scientific journals and quietly shared among government agencies. It was a breakthrough that reignited hope and fear in equal measure. If the AI was correct, then the world had spent years searching the wrong ocean floor. But this was just the beginning, because while machine learning could process existing data, another technology was about to simulate the ocean itself, not just reading history, but recreating it. The next step would take the mystery of MH370 into an entirely new realm: quantum computing. By 2023, the mystery had reached a new frontier. Traditional computers had pushed their limits, crunching terabytes of satellite and sonar data, but still leaving too many unanswered questions. That's when a team from IBM's Qiskit project stepped in with something radically different: quantum computing. Unlike standard processors that analyze data in linear steps, quantum systems process millions of variables at once, mapping the chaos of the ocean with near-organic accuracy. Using IBM's quantum platform, researchers simulated the Indian Ocean's complex current system, including deep eddies, temperature layers, and wind-driven turbulence, at a resolution 10 times higher than any model before it. Their goal was simple but almost impossible: to retrace the exact journey of every known MH370 fragment. From the flaperon found on Réunion to the engine casing on Madagascar's coast, each piece was entered into the simulation as a floating particle, tracked backward in time across years of current shifts and seasonal storms. The algorithm didn't just trace where the debris had drifted, it reconstructed where it had begun. The results were stunning. Every simulation converged on one specific region: a deep trench west of Perth, Australia. An underwater canyon so remote and steep that it had never appeared in previous sonar maps. The terrain there was chaotic, full of jagged cliffs and silt-filled ravines that could easily conceal an aircraft's remains. When the model's coordinates were compared with updated sonar scans from Australia's Geoscience Agency, the match was almost exact. But the most chilling moment came when the team cross-checked their findings with a different dataset: hydroacoustic signals recorded by underwater monitoring stations in 2014. Those stations, originally designed to detect nuclear tests, had picked up a low-frequency pulse the same night MH370 vanished. At the time, it was dismissed as natural seismic noise. Now, after nearly a decade, the new analysis showed the sound wave had originated precisely from the trench the quantum model identified. The coincidence was too perfect to ignore. The pattern of the wave matched that of a massive impact, the kind produced when a large metal object, like a Boeing 777, strikes the ocean at high velocity. For the first time, the technology didn't just suggest where MH370 might be. It provided a scientifically coherent story, a location, a time, and a physical event that lined up with every trace of evidence found so far. But the deeper the researchers looked, the more one question began to surface, a question no algorithm could answer. If this is truly where the plane ended its flight, what exactly happened in those final moments before it hit the sea? In early 2024, a new clue emerged from one of the most unlikely sources imaginable: the deep-sea listening stations designed to detect underwater nuclear tests. These hydroacoustic sensors, spread across the southern Indian Ocean, had been quietly recording low-frequency sound for years. But when scientists reanalyzed the 2014 data using modern AI filters, they found something that sent a chill through the entire investigation. At precisely the same time that flight MH370 vanished from radar, the sensors captured a low, resonant pulse, a deep, thunder-like rumble that lasted nearly 2 minutes. At first, analysts believed it might have been seismic activity or underwater volcanic noise. But when the audio was processed through machine learning models trained to distinguish natural events from mechanical ones, the system detected an unmistakable signature: the acoustic fingerprint of a large object slamming into water at tremendous speed. The amplitude and decay rate of the signal matched perfectly with what would be expected from a falling aircraft impacting the ocean surface. It wasn't a gradual breakup or a mid-air explosion, it was a single, concentrated impact, an object striking the sea intact with catastrophic force. But what followed next shocked even the researchers. AI didn't stop at identifying the impact. It detected faint, repeating waveforms hidden in the echo pattern, secondary ripples that propagated outward in all directions. These were consistent with a sudden pressure burst, a shockwave traveling through both air and water. In physical terms, it was the kind of wave created when a sealed structure, like an aircraft cabin, implodes under external pressure after a high-speed descent. In simple terms, it meant the Boeing 777 didn't disintegrate mid-flight. It plunged into the Indian Ocean as one complete unit. That conclusion overturned years of assumptions that the plane might have broken apart in the air or exploded due to decompression. Instead, the data implied a deliberate, controlled descent, one that ended in an almost vertical impact. The implications were terrifying. A pilotless crash caused by mechanical failure would have produced chaotic noise, scattered fragments, and multiple small splashes across time. But this was different. The sound profile was clean, singular, and purposeful. If the acoustic signature truly belonged to MH370, then it wasn't just the sound of an accident, it was the echo of intent. So, what happened in those final minutes? Was this a loss of control, or a calculated dive into the abyss? By 2022, another discovery reignited one of the most unsettling theories about MH370, the possibility that the plane's final moments were not mechanical, but human. On the shores of Madagascar, a fragment of the aircraft's landing gear was recovered, weathered by salt and time. At first glance, it appeared like any other piece of wreckage collected over the years. But when investigators studied it under high-resolution scanners, they noticed something impossible to ignore. The metal showed a distinct inward bend, deformation from the inside out. That small but crucial detail meant one thing: the landing gear had been extended before impact. In aviation terms, that action can't happen by accident. The gear must be deployed manually from inside the cockpit, requiring deliberate input from a pilot. In normal circumstances, lowering the landing gear during an ocean impact would make no sense. It would only increase drag and guarantee a more violent crash. Yet the evidence was clear. Someone inside MH370 had lowered it moments before the plane hit the sea. Independent researchers Richard Godfrey and Blaine Gibson presented their findings in a joint analysis, arguing that this could indicate a controlled descent rather than a mechanical failure. They suggested that Captain Zahari Ahmad Shah, the 53-year-old pilot with over 18,000 flight hours, might have intentionally steered the jet into the ocean in a calculated murder-suicide. It was a theory that had circulated since 2014, but was always dismissed as speculation. Zahari was an experienced, respected pilot, a family man and flight simulator enthusiast who trained younger aviators. Yet data from his home computer flight simulator showed routes eerily similar to MH370's final path over the Indian Ocean. Combined with the newly analyzed landing gear fragment, those details began to paint a darker picture. Still, there was no official confirmation. Malaysia's final investigation report in 2018 stated that the plane's disappearance could not be explained with certainty, and no conclusive evidence of deliberate action had been found. The official stance remained neutral, neither confirming nor denying the possibility of suicide. But the questions wouldn't die. If Zahari truly lowered the landing gear, what was his intention? Was it to make the crash faster? To ensure there would be no survivors? Or was it something more symbolic? A pilot choosing how his story would end? Even after a decade, the mystery of intent remains the most haunting aspect of MH370. AI and quantum analysis could locate the wreckage, model the currents, and even recreate the sound of the crash. But they could never decode motive, the one variable no machine can compute. And so, the question lingers like the echo of that final descent. If Captain Zahari really chose this ending, why? After more than a decade of silence, artificial intelligence and quantum computing have done what human investigators could not. They have mapped the untraceable. The algorithms found patterns in chaos, rewound time through data, and pointed toward the final resting place of flight MH370. For the first time, the greatest mystery in modern aviation has a shape, a sound, and a probable ending. Yet what AI uncovered is far from comforting. Beneath all the numbers and precision lies a truth colder than the ocean itself. The most unpredictable force in the sky isn't weather or mechanical failure. It's the human mind. The International Civil Aviation Organization has already begun drafting new safety standards to ensure that no aircraft can ever vanish again. Future jetliners may soon stream their black box data live to ground stations, making disappearance impossible. Technology will watch every second, every altitude change, every heartbeat of a flight. But no algorithm can predict intent. No sensor can detect despair. And if a pilot ever decides to take control away from the system, no machine can stop him. So even as AI rewrites history and brings us closer to the truth, it also exposes a darker reality, that technology may illuminate the ocean floor, but it cannot fully understand the people who fly above it. Because in the end, the greatest mystery of MH370 was never just about where it fell. It was about why. Subscribe to MindGap and join us as we continue uncovering the truths the world tried to forget.